Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to my Murphy table. Today what I want to do is talk about the Heroes of Normandy computer game. And I thought what would be a great way to talk about that would be to take a look at the board game that it's based on. And then when we move over to look at the computer game, maybe we can kind of compare and see how the game converted over to the computer. So the reason why I want to take a look at the board game first is I just wanted to show the appeal of the board game. Right now when I go onto the forums, there's a lot of folks that aren't happy with the gameplay of the computer game, and we'll talk more about that when we get there. So there must have been something about the board game that compelled someone to transfer this over to a computer format. So let's take a look and see maybe what that appeal is. I don't want to take too long because I want to make sure I dedicate some time to the actual computer play portion. So this might be a little quicker than like a full review. But first, you have a rule book, you have a separate scenario book. The first thing I have to say is that the computer manual is very disappointing when you compare it to the rule book that comes with Heroes of Normandy. The Heroes of Normandy rule book for the board game does an excellent job of explaining the components. Does a great job of showing examples of play. Does a wonderful job of explaining army composition and creation. So when you want to make custom templates for your platoons. And I mean, it's really good. Very colorful, lots of examples of movement. The computer rule book for Heroes of Normandy, well, it reads like a computer manual and doesn't really show a lot of examples. I mean, it explains that certain things give a +1 or a +2, but it really doesn't explain how that works in the game mechanics. And you get that in the board game version. It explains zones of control and shows more combat examples. So it's really hard to say if things like zone of control are being enforced, or how that affects certain combat aspects of like assaults and things like that. Line of sight. So I just think that this is just a superior rule book between the computer and the board game. In fact, my recommendation is go to the Devil Pig Games website and actually download the board game rules, and it will immensely increase your understanding of how the computer game works. It does a really good job of explaining like the different ammo chits that you can get. All the things that can augment your gameplay are explained really, really well in the board game rules, again with examples. Not to say that the rules aren't explained in the computer version, they just don't explain it very well. I mean, sure, they say, well, this gives you a +1, but it doesn't really show why or how, and then how it can be applied. Yeah, just really lacking. So definitely the rule book for the computer version, much better. Scenario book doesn't really matter. I mean, it just lays out how the scenarios are set up, tells you what units come, and that's kind of really doesn't matter because you have that in the computer. You can look at the scenarios and then you can build custom armies for skirmishes. I just wish they did a better job of explaining how to buy the equipment for your custom templates for platoons in the skirmishes, but it is what it is. But another cool thing, the quality of the components. Now we're going to get into the components. This for a board game is out freaking standing. First you have a modular cardboard, but it's like a really thick cardboard. So that's good. I mean, this is sturdy cardboard, double-sided. You can really lay these out to many different ways for showing the terrain you're going to battle on. The combat values for the terrain are built onto the board, whereas on the computer you have to right-click a terrain to see it. I know that that's something I've read on the forums. People wished you could see the values on the board, and that would be a nice option if they could add it, a toggle it, where you can select, pull up an options menu in the game and say turn the values on or turn the values off. I think that would be a great addition for people who are coming from the board game. For people who are not coming from the board game, it still might be nice to see those baked into the screen with the option to turn them off, just so you can kind of start to learn how the terrain plays into your game strategy without having to right click everything. So great components here for the map tiles, and they don't warp. I know some of my other games that have big tiles like this tend to warp because they're not as thick. They're really prone to moisture, and these have stayed perfect. So this is a really good quality component right there. So the other quality components, these tiles, they're just as thick, just as durable. The artwork is amazing. I mean, I don't know if that's blurry. Hand, unblurry it. But it's just phenomenal, the artwork on here. And that's probably one of the coolest things was the counters are huge. Now when you play on a tablet or you play on your computer monitor, depending on your screen size, these things, they don't really do justice to the size that they are in person that you're looking at, where you can read all the numbers and stuff like that. I know that if your screen is too small, then the counters really seem kind of bunched up with a lot of information overload. Bunch of numbers, bunch of artwork. But for the board game, these are outstanding. A lot of traditional war games come with counters that are just a quarter of the size. These are huge. They're like 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. I mean, I haven't measured them, but they're huge. And the other components are just the same. Here's some equipment you can get. Here's your Panzerfaust. Here's where you can buy your Zundap. But then, you know, here's the vehicles. I mean, they're just huge. You know, here's a Panzer tank. The Rex side. So the artwork is good. The counter size is great size. It fits everything. And I did read somewhere, well, I was watching a YouTube review or playthrough, and the person said of the computer game, he was like, man, I wish that the counters were a little more 3D like the board game. Well, or he said like the miniatures. This is not a miniatures game at all. However, if you do search the internet, you'll see that they are using some miniatures with these counters, and their reasoning was if you wanted, they're sized specifically to hold 15mm infantry and tanks. I just thought of this. I should have grabbed this sooner, but here's what they mean. If you take your counter and put a 15mm tank. So here's a Panzer IV with Scherzen. Here's the comparable drawing. Boom. This 15mm miniature with, like, you know, maybe a little stickum or something fits perfectly. You can read all the numbers. I mean, you just gotta, like I said, put some stickum. But now you can give that miniatures 3D terrain pop to your board game. So again, the board game has outstanding high quality production value. You get these nice wooden counters for your orders. You get custom dice that look just like the computer. The computer did a good job reproducing all of this. So when you're talking about why you would get the board game, because it's gorgeous, it's great. Now how the game plays, that's different. We can talk about that when we hit the computer. But one thing the computer is currently missing, and this is as of October 5th, 2015. I think by the time I get this all edited, put together, it might be October 7th. They didn't have the cards. And the cards, this is the thing that people are really clamoring for and missing. These cards augment the game in unbelievable amount of ways. This almost is a combination of dice, and as you've played the computer game in the early days, this Dice 6 is unforgiving. It's terrible. But the cards from the board game really augment this. The cards are coming. We will have them in the computer at some point, and then that would definitely change everyone's opinion of how the game plays. Maybe not necessarily for the better, but the cards. I mean, here's Battle Rage. You know, it gives a bonus when assaulting. Add +2 the result of your die roll. And then there's some cards that augment before you make the die roll, or you play them during when an enemy moves. So these things are going to take the die 6 that you roll, are then augmented by the combat values on your unit, are then augmented by the possible little ammo chits or veteran tokens that you can buy, and then further augmented by your card. So there are a lot of ways that you can augment this 1-die-6 roll in the board game that I think will help people's game playing experience once it's fully implemented into the computer. So I think the other thing about the board game that people might not know prior to jumping into the computer is that this is a low complexity war game. So even though it has all these fabulous components, the complexity of the game, I'm going to say, is low. When you compare this to like Advanced Squad Leader, it doesn't compare at all. They're both tactical scale games, but something like Advanced Squad Leader is deep. It's a simulation game. This is not a simulation game. This is a game that you can whip out with your buddy, maybe spend an hour, hour and a half setting it up, play a game or two, tear it all down, and in a couple hours you've managed to play a couple, war game scenarios. This, for those who might be familiar, I would say is more complex than Memoir 44. Memoir 44 is an easy game to play. When you start adding expansions, it becomes complex in its own right. There's its own depth, complexity to the gameplay. But just as far as the basic mechanics of like the base set, which is what this is, Memoir 44 is a little bit easier, but this is not as complicated as, say, Conflict of Heroes. Conflict of Heroes is another really good game that has a little more rules depth to it, some things like rallying units and things that the bigger war games would have that this is missing. So the focus of this is, I would say, a really gorgeous looking gateway game, something that gets you used to some of the concepts of war games, orders, the dice roll, building your units, and then you can move on to more complex games. So this is fun in its own right, but I think you need to understand what their goal was. And the goal was a fast, furious war game that you could play several scenarios in a couple of hours, pack up and go home. The traditional board games like Fighting Formations, Großdeutschland Division, you can set that up and play one scenario for several hours. So this was to be a quick game. One thing I want to point out, I was going to point something out and then completely forgot what that was. So just keep that in mind. This was not to be, I was going to say, this is, the gateway game. They call this a gateway game. I think I mentioned that. So this is what you show your friends to say, hey, here's an entry-level war game, and now let's move on to something more complex. That pretty much sums up the board game, why I think people like it, and why I think it was exciting that people saw that this was coming to the computer. Does it translate well to the computer? Well, we'll take a look at that when we move over to the computer. But for now, I just wanted you to see where we're coming from with the board game. All right, thanks. In about a minute or two, I'll switch over and we'll take a look at the computer. All right, thanks a lot.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the computer portion of Heroes of Normandy. So I've got the startup here screen. This was something I read on a forum. It was talking about how do you get to the game manual. I know you could probably dig through the file that you have stored on the computer where the game is, and they should have a folder named manual, I think is what I saw on the forum. Or right here, right below the play game button, there's a link right there for the game manual, and there's a couple different languages you can pick. I'm assuming German and French. Also a link to the forums, which are really good, by the way. And then the game manual, I pulled that up. I just wanted to show you real quick, like the contrast from the board game manual and the computer manual. So with the board game manual, it was, like I said, colorful, had examples of play and stuff like that. The computer version of the manual, it reads like a computer version of a manual. It's functional. It does, if you can scroll down, scroll mouse, but it will come through and it explains things of the computer version of the game. It's not, I don't know, it works. It's functional. There it mentions your +2 bonuses. of the different terrain. I still think you'd be better off getting the actual board game rule book and then use this to follow through and see how things are implemented in the computer game. It might not explain everything perfectly, but then like here's some of the different special icons you'll see on your units. And I think the board game rulebook will do a really good job of explaining in better detail, and some of these will have examples of how they're used in the board game rulebook. So use them together. I know some people think that this should explain everything perfectly, but I don't think there's anything wrong with having both rulebooks side by side to really give you a good understanding of the core rules. Not that the game is super complicated in the first place. You know, I mentioned that it is kind of a what they call beer and pretzels, that light war game experience where it focuses on like speed of play and brutality. I mean, it's just, you know, once you play it and you live and die by that die 6 roll, and it's like, ugh, some days you do good, some days you don't do so well. So anyway, there's the rule book. Let's hop into the actual game. So when you pop in, I know a lot of this you've probably seen on other videos, so I won't take too much time explaining everything, but they are in version, currently as of right now, version 1.03. It was 1.01 when I got it. On the forum they mentioned that the Steam version of the game was like causing multiplayer to crash. I don't know if that's because there was too many Steam users, coding problem, whatever it was. So they pushed out this version 1.03. So if you're on the non-Steam version, there's a slight chance that you might still be on the 1.01, but pretty soon everybody should be on the 1.03. The forums have indicated they've already found a couple other bugs they're fixing, so this version should go up pretty quick. And that's great. That means they're on top of things, and I really appreciate the dev team. Not, you know, have a couple games from Matrix that feel like they were abandoned, and patches were very slow and incremental to come out. Well, of course they're incremental, but very slow to come out. But these guys are active in the forum. Like they really stand behind their game, and it's great. The artwork, very faithful to the board game, as you can see here just by looking at the cover. I call the cover, I'm thinking like the box art, but it fits perfect. It's a very good translation. So when you hit the game wiki, if you haven't looked at the game wiki, please look at the game wiki. Now, right now it does cover British, American, and there you go. Your British troops, the American troops, and the German troops that come with the game. And this is great because the basic board game, you get German and American, and then the British are an expansion. There's also a German army box, an American army box. Some units from those army boxes are in here, and you can go through the wiki. And I think like this guy here, this comp guy, he's from like the army box. I don't remember him at all being in the basics. So that's kind of neat. They've included some additional units that you don't see from the base game. So already you got some more bang for your buck. However, you don't get the British and the Skirmish yet. That was one thing we'll talk about real quick. I was going to say, what would have been nice in the wiki is if they included a link to the rulebook from here. The rules should be part of the wiki, and then the wiki should also have a page that explains all these traits in one section, so you don't have to click on every single unit to try and get an explanation of a particular symbol. It'd be nice if they had a tab that I could click, and that was rules, and another tab that was all the unit symbols. So that's one tip I'd like to offer. One thing they did improve on the maps, though, was the skirmish maps were locked. You had to play some of the smaller maps first, and then when you come down to the larger maps, excuse me, I don't see the message now, but it used to say somewhere on here that you had to complete the smaller maps first, but they've all been unlocked, which is great. So you get a lot more bang for your buck coming right into the computer version. And as you can see, when we kind of looked at some of the board game stuff, the artwork is perfect, it's spot on. And the only difference is on these maps, though, you don't see the defensive modifiers, the terrain modifiers. you have to right click on the map to get those. And you've got the ability to play as Americans or Germans. There's several map sizes, which is, I mean, this is great. The other thing I would like to see is, well, let me see. Does it flip if I change size? Yeah, no. It'd be nice if you could flip the map. So instead of always deploying down here, you know, maybe I would like the chance to deploy up here for once. So that would be something. I played this map actually, and wow, let's see. No, it wasn't this one. Let me see. I played the smaller map version of this. I just had a memory here. What did I do? I played, was it this one? Yeah, I played this map. I purchased a Panzer IV unit. Had him sitting right here, diagonally across the bushes here, or the hedge, whatever that was. And he put his army leader up here for some reason. And my Panzer IV just killed Stuart that he had up here, and I won the game because Stuart had his two orders, and once your opponent loses all their orders, game over. So this guy was dead by the end of turn 3, and it was like nice, because you know there's some discussion about turn length and whatnot, and I won't get into all of that, but you know, that's a rule thing for the game. It does have set turns, and you know, some folks are saying, you know, there's not enough turns, the game forces you to move forward, and it's true. There's certain aspects of the game, from the board game as well, it's just you always have to be moving because it's a game of action. You know, it's that replication of like Hollywood movies, and I think sometimes people, if you don't understand, you know, if people don't understand what the game is trying to portray, it's trying to portray like an homage to these World War II Hollywood stylized over-the-top movies where the action is over the top. You're constantly moving forward. You know, hordes of people are being mowed down all the time, and that's kind of how this game plays. You don't actually always have the luxury of just sitting back, moving a couple folks into position. By the time you get folks kind of into position, then the game is all, you know, maybe already over halfway over, and you won't be able to finish your objective. So it does a good job of portraying that I have to keep moving. And I do think that maybe if you understand what the game is prior to getting it, that might help you enjoy what you're getting a little bit more, or might steer you away. You know, no need to purchase something you're not into. So the tutorials, like I said again, you know, folks have looked at this in other YouTubes, so I don't want to take too much time for that. But I do want to go into, well, let's take a look at this skirmish builder, look at some of the units, and we can talk about the artwork. Because really, if you're going to compare the computer to the board game, you know, let's look at the components. You know, the rules we can pop into the skirmish and kind of talk about how they translated the rules. But let's start with some good graphics here. I'll play with the Americans. I'll do the small map here. I'll just pick this map. I'll pick a large map so you can look at more unit choices. So what's neat is if you are able to zoom in on the map, which I can't do it right here, but when we pop in, they have the map board numbers, and I haven't looked yet to see if these map board numbers exactly match the ones in the base box, but it would be neat that you could replicate on your board game the maps that you're pulling and setting up from the computer game. That's kind of cool. So once you have a map and once you have picture size, you can pick a time of day, and it's nice because it does actually modify the field. But this is the one thing I don't think the game explained very well, and that was how to create your armies. And this is a huge component of the board game. The board game can be played solo. You have to play both sides yourself. But like most war games, they expect you to have an opponent. And a big draw of the board game is the fact that you can customize your forces like you would in a miniatures tournament style game, where you're given a certain amount of points to spend on units. You and your opponent would agree upon a points value, and then from all the components you buy your troops. So for example here, just right here, a regular army for that large map, Here's the overall commander unit, and the thing it doesn't really explain is what does all this mean when you're looking at your troops. And it says, you know, if you look at it over time through trial and error, you'll figure out what this stuff means, but I really think it should be explained better. So for example, because these are pre-selected, we can just talk about them. You don't, depending on the size of match that you get, you don't always have all of these platoons in here. So in the board game, for example, if you say you're going to play like a 200-point game, this platoon costs 70 of your 200 points. So here they use gold. You see that there's a cost in gold, and the cost in gold matches their point value here. So that's generous of them. Oh, he's locked. So with your points available, let's say we had that steward out and veteran taken out. Basically, you would start by picking your platoon piece, or here's the commander example, or platoon piece, and all of these squares would be empty. If you wanted to outfit additional things for your troops, then that's where you would click here, like click to buy. Now, one nice thing that the game has done is it's filtered out all the pieces that can't fit in these squares. So all of the units you buy have a little color code band, and then they have to match the color code band in this square in order to be a valid purchase. So for example, as you can see, it has to match the size and the bands. So for this section here, because it has a gray band or this red, white, and blue band, I can place either gray banded items or red, white, and blue items. And if I click over here, if I had any other equipment choices, they would have to have the gray bands. Now the game filters out inapplicable items, so you can't put something in that doesn't fit. But the board game, you don't have that luxury, so you just have to remember the rule. At least one of the color bands has to match. We'll put that back. Click to buy. They had veteran. I believe they... Oh, I thought he had some veteran markers in there. Yes, he did. And so you can see here, one color band matches. So that's how it works in the board game. And then the star corresponds to how many orders that you receive. So when you look down here at this rifle platoon normally comes with none of these. These spots here would all be blank, and this platoon, 4th Infantry Division of the 8th Infantry Regiment, would have, that comes with it regardless of options. These are all options. These options are filled for you, but you could take them out if you wanted. But it comes with Lieutenant Jones, this recon team, this fire team, and a support team. What these red squares are, they don't correspond to the computer game. They're here and faithfully reproduced for us, but these are for the board game. The board game, what this is saying is, when this is destroyed, like if you lose 3 units here, like the platoon comes with 3, but if you or with 4, but if you lose 3 of your 4, you would actually flip this platoon marker over, and it would have this number here, this 70, would be a different value that says this is how many points it's worth to my opponent. This Willys 50 cal Jeep, if it gets destroyed, you would flip it over, and then it would say how many points, how many victory points my opponent gets for it. So they have a different scoring system in the computer, and it doesn't go by these red squares. So if you see the red squares, they don't apply to the computer. The stars do, though. So if I wanted to buy a unit here, I could pick any one of these if I had enough gold. I don't. But if I bought a unit in here, I would then earn that extra order. So you might say, I think I can do without a Sherman. So I'm going to click and get rid of the Sherman. But I'm definitely going to pick, because it's got to match, put matching bands. I'm going to pick a bazooka squad. Oh, no. Wrong spot. Click here. There we go. I'm going to put that bazooka squad. And now I get another order to use with all my troops. And if you watch up here the order, see it disappears. So even when you're setting up a skirmish, you can come in here and customize a little bit. Just be aware what matters for you. And so like if you buy grenades, these squares, they just represent you have 3 uses of that item. Same with like the veteran, 3 uses. And it's the same thing with the board game, except the ×3 is just covered up by these squares. And this is a nice addition of the computer game because it keeps track of how many of you used. In the board game, you would buy this section here, and then they actually have 3 little grenade tokens that you would be able to use on the game board itself. So, you know, that's, I mean, it's cool, it's fun. I'm a tactile visual person, so it's fun to have a little grenade and actually put it on the map where I want it to go. But for convenience sake, they just put a little counter for you. But anyway, that's the basics of putting together your platoon. You know, what also would be cool, go back to that wiki, and then if they added a section that explained what grenades and ammo do. They do have that in the rule book, but it would be nice if they also included that in the wiki, so I didn't have to keep going back and forth between an outside program and the game. I like it when my game contains all the information I need inside of it. Minor gripe. Now when you start the game, you got to pick for your opponent, and you can, oh no, they won't let me customize. So what I see is what I get. So I can move through a couple options and try to find the weakest, the one setup that looks like I could take it out the easiest. If I take me a tank, I want to make sure I find something that has no tanks, but no, they got stuff that can do some tank on tank fighting. But that's everything that you see for them is set the same way. So you might want to look and go, oh, well then I want to find somebody who doesn't have as many orders as me. And then you'll notice that he's got 1, 2, 3 additional units with that purchase, 4 on that basic unit. So that right there is 7 units, 8 for this, 9 for him, 10 for that, and Mr. Otto, his tank, that's like 11 units he has, and he's only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 markers. So each turn he'll activate 5 of these 11 units. But if you customize your platoon, you could probably end up with more orders, so you can activate and shoot more stuff than your opponent can. So that's why platoon customization is important, even for skirmish games. So when we start the game, this is where you really check and see how it compares to the board game, and it really does compare very well. You know, you can criticize the game rules and dice rolls, and I think that's, you know, good. But as far as a board game conversion to computer, it's pretty faithful. I mean, this looks just like it. You know, we looked at components, and can I move around much? Okay, I'll just hit proceed. I'm trying to use my keyboard to move around. Come on, I want to just look at the map. There we go. I mean, it's like spot on. You know, it's great to see. All the numbers are there. And, you know, if somebody wants me to go in depth more on specific rules or what all the numbers mean, there are some videos that have done that already, so I don't want to repeat too much of that. But, you know, if you want that from me, no problem. I can come back in and we can explain things in more detail and show the mechanics better in action. Again, I just kind of wanted to focus on how does this compare to the board game. And here's the board numbers, so you can check to see. I don't know if we have those. R4A. I don't think those are the boards we have. I should have looked that up before I came in. Like C4B we might have. But see, just like the board game, you can put, you know, these tiles to augment it. So there's buildings that have rules for buildings and throwing grenades in buildings and shooting from buildings and arcs of fire. So even though this might be a simplistic game rules-wise, it does have some concepts from the bigger games that you have to keep in mind. A lot of supplies that you can pick up. So how the game works, right now this is the positioning of your troops phase. I can move these around however I want. I probably don't want this tank lined up behind this long hedgerow. So I'm going to move this for now. This is kind of a pain to shift stuff around how I want. But I'm going to put him here because if I go up, you know, there's an enemy tank right there. Half track, you know, see, I probably don't want any of those. They can't cross the river. I've got this little bridge that I gotta. Oh, here's a bigger bridge. We'll put him here. He can't fit there. We'll just turn him sideways, drop him off. All right, so I'll just hit the continue button. So how this compares then, this does a really good job of following the rules actually. Now if I can just get my map to move, you're going to start by assigning orders. A difference between the board game and computer game is it does not do alternating order placement. So for example, I would place an order, then the computer would place one, then I would place one. And in the two-player board game, it's actually kind of fun because you really get to mess with your opponent and try to fake them out onto like where you're putting your number 1, or because like I might put my number 6 here, and then my opponent has to really guess, well, is that the first unit he wants to activate? He might not know that I've decided I'm going to activate him last in my row of troops. And then my next activation could be the tank. I might have that as number 2, which in this case it was my second item. Or I might say, you know what, I'm going to put that first. So, he doesn't really know if that's, even though I'm putting that as my second order down, it is my first activation in the sequence. So that's kind of fun against another player. It's not really replicated here. The computer doesn't care what you do because they don't track that. They're not fun to try and fake out. But in a multiplayer game, it would definitely be kind of fun. So we'll put our bluff order. So this part is slightly different than the board game. And then when we proceed, see, he's placed all his orders, which is, good. But now here's where, again, we want to see how does the gameplay compare. And this is how the game goes. Your first activated unit gets to decide what to do, and you're gonna pick one of your weapon systems. Tanks, if I zoom in, they do have 2 weapons. There's usually a primary and a secondary. Or if he has like a special option here, suppressive fire, I could do, it's just nice to have the big button here that kind of tells you what the bonuses are for the different types of firing, and the fact I have different types of firing. And if I can move and fire, so check this out, tanks have a symbol here that's for move and fire, just like the board game, and it's easy to implement. Let's say I want to do killing shots. This tells me my odds, and it's nice because you could, here I'll just cancel out. I mean, you could yourself calculate the odds, because against the infantry unit I have +3. My target here is probably, looks like normally a 4 defense, but because of the terrain that they're in, the terrain type gives them a +1 defense. That gives them the 5 that you're looking at. Okay, so my attack value is a 3 against their 5. Normally I have to roll, that would be a 2 that I would have to roll or higher on my 6-sided dice. But if you're over 7 squares away from your opponent, then you get a -2 modifier. So if I drag my machine gun out, you can look over here, it calculates that math for you. So I'm not committed to shoot, but I can see that here's his base defense, here's his 1 from the terrain, gives him a 5. Here's my +3 versus infantry. Here's the fact that I'm over 7, so that gives me a total of +1 on my roll, which means I have to roll a 4 or higher. So if he is 5, so if I take that 5, subtract the 1, it means a 4 or higher, and then that's reflected right here on the die. And then this is the part that a lot of people hate. Oh, well, here's the thing. If I wanted to move and shoot, before I actually shoot, I can then tell it, yeah, I plan on moving, which gives me another -2 modifier. But if I wanted to move that Sherman up better to support things instead of at such a long range, I could go ahead and make it even tougher on myself. But for now, we'll just roll. And then you get the die 6. Now, right now, the hardest part about the game, because you don't have cards that we saw in the board game really augment this die. You have cards that will augment before you roll, they'll augment after you roll. Um, there's things you can play on your opponent that might modify the hit score, or things that you'll play. I mean, there's a lot of things that can modify this roll. In the game, the biggest modifiers you have are extra ammo, so you can add a bonus to the hit roll before you roll, or this veteran, you can re-roll. I only got 3, but if I wanted, I can re-roll this roll. So like 3, so close, it's teasing me. I'll hit the re-roll button. Oh, it's terrible. Oh, jeez, come on. Yay! I got the 6. But the flip side is it did use all 3 of my veteran status. So I don't have any more of those. That and that was a terrible time to use that, because it's wounded, but it's here. So all of those elements from the board game are here. I know that as people play, we've found, I say we, but as a community, we have found some concerns. Nothing really groundbreaking, but just, oh, here's an oddity. Should it be that way? And that's why they've put out a couple patches, is as they find things that don't quite match how it should be, they're on top of things. But for the most part, this is the game. Simple beer and pretzels, die 6. Once they add the cards, you'll have some more tactical elements. There's really not much more to say other than this is a good conversion of a board game to the computer. Your enjoyment of the game mechanics will vary from person to person, but they're faithfully reproduced here. Once we get the cards, then we'll have pretty much the board game in a computer format. It's fine, I think. So, with that in mind, I will sign off. And then again, if you have any questions, please post them in the comments, or maybe on a forum or something, and I'll do my best to answer what I can. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that this gives you some insight to either make the decision to jump into the game or not get the game, but at least you come away a little more informed than maybe when you first watched it. If not, let me know and I can maybe address any concerns in a further video. Otherwise, have a great day, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.